Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone. This is our 10th meeting of the EJ Council EJ Council, and I'm really happy to be here. I joined last meeting as my first meeting as Undersecretary, and I am now the chair of the EJ Council, and so I'm really happy and grateful to join all of you and to have this meeting. I realized that we were hoping to meet in person, but really grateful that we're here. And so I will. We have some logistical information that we need to review, and so if I can have Kessel review the logistics, that would be helpful.
Sorry there, I had to find the unmute button. All right, let me move to the logistics. Hello, everyone. My name is Kessel John with ERG, a contractor supporting this webinar. So first of all, please use the interpretation channel to select your preferred language. I'm now going to have our interpreters join us in the English room to say that. And so could the Spanish interpreter please speak? All right, Portuguese. Haitian Creole. And Cape Verdean Creole. All right, thank you very much. Now you can also select ASL as well. So people who are speaking English, please use the English channel so you will be able to hear any translated comments. Closed captioning is auto-generated, and you should be able to find it using the CC icon in your Zoom control panel. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. And please, if you have any technical difficulties, please send an email to meetings@erg.com. I'm going to put that email in the chat in a moment with any technical questions relating to meeting logistics. A link with the information and documents used in this meeting, including slides and the agenda, will be dropped into the chat. I would also like to remind any council members that they should not use the Zoom chat for anything other than logistics, as the audience does not have access to the chat and discussion needs to happen in public view. And now I'll turn it back over to Maria Belen.
Thank you so much. So again, welcome everyone. I will first review the agenda and then we will do a roll call just to make sure we are all here, that the council members are here and that we have quorum. So the agenda is, right now we're overviewing logistics, we'll do roll call, and then we'll take questions from the comments from the public and questions. And I did allow a little bit of time for response to comments, so that could either be comments, in response to the questions from council members, and hopefully it will not go over our time slot, but I do want to allow, if there is a question or comment or clarification that a council member wants to answer regarding a comment, that we do make space for that. And then we will go over logistics of our future meetings. I know we've had a little bit of just trouble ensuring that we have sort of consistent either monthly meetings or bi-month or every 2 months. And so just want to nail some of those logistics moving forward and hopefully schedule for the next 6 or 12 months so that we can have those in our calendar. And we will then do an update of our EJ office and priorities. We will then get an update on the EJ strategy. Then we'll talk about working groups and sort of my proposal for working groups and get the feedback of the council members. Then we'll take comments and questions again from the public with a little bit of time for us to again respond if there is a response or clarification that we want to make. And then we adjourn. So that is our agenda for today. And so now I will do roll call. So if you could just say aye or here, or just respond. Kalila Barnett,
Here.
Madeline Fraser Cook, Melissa Ferretti,
Here.
Carol Holly, Caroline Hahn,
Here.
Namrita Kapoor,
Here.
Lydia Lowe,
Here.
Marcos Luda,
Here.
Peter Matthey, Maria Evelyn Power, I am here. Sophia Owen,
Here.
Jen Salinetti,
Here.
Pat Spence,
Here.
and Ari Zorn, I believe is not here. So with that, I believe we have quorum. And so we will open it up right now to questions or comments from the public, and with a little bit of time for us to respond at the end if there is sort of a response, or we can also follow up with them later afterwards after the meeting. And so we welcome comments from the public. You can either raise your hand right now or put it. You have also the ability they will give you the ability to unmute yourself if you would like to make verbal comment. You can also make a comment in any of the languages that are offered here. And once you are unmuted, if you could simply begin talking, and the interpreter will translate your words into the English language if it is one of the other languages that we are interpreting for this evening. It is good to remind folks that this is not the only time to provide comments, and so there will be other meetings and other times and opportunities to provide comments. So we welcome any comments and questions from the public. Let's see, if there is a question or comment that's being, I guess that it will be interpreted by the interpreter. Sorry, I'm a little bit the logistics, but this will. The comments will be translated and they will be interpreted for us to understand. Just want to make that clear. So if you would like to write your comments, you can also do that in the Q&A, and we will read those for us to respond or to get back to you and follow up. Just to remind just the council members that we can't use the chat box because it's only for internal discussion. We want to really refrain of the chat box, and really in the end of the question and comments from the public, I'll just keep track of time to make sure that we're moving on to the next agenda item, because I know we could sort of, with comments and questions from the public, could become a longer conversation. So I'll just keep track of time during that time. So I think we're ready for questions and comments from the public.
I might have missed this. Have you approved the minutes?
Oh, no, you are totally right. Thank you for reminding me. So we sent out the minutes from the last meeting, and so we do need to approve the minutes from the April 26th EJC meeting. So if I could get a raised hand or a sort of physical hand or the raised hand motion on Zoom, if you we move to approve the minutes. Can I get a motion?
Yeah, Pat Spence will make a motion to approve the April minutes.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion comments? Okay, can we move to a vote? And so if you can raise your hand physically or the motion, the icon at the bottom of your screen. So Castle, can you just let me know when I think we have everyone?
Okay, so we have Patricia, Caroline, Sophia, Namrita. Marcos is raising his hand on camera. Kalila is raising her hand on camera. Oh, people keep turning on their cameras. One moment.
Do you want me to? I can-
Lydia, go on. I apologize.
No. Go for it. Keep going. Sorry.
So yes, Patricia Spence, Caroline Hahn, Sophia Owen, Namrita Kapoor, Lydia Lowe, Melissa Ferretti, Jen Salinetti, Marcos Luna all have risen their hands.
Great. Thank you so much, Kessel, for the reminder on the minutes. So now we'll move to public comments or questions. And so if we can go with the first one.
Yes, Sabrina Davis, I see that you have your hand up, so I'm going to allow you to talk. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions that I've had for a while in regards to the EJ law, and I'm not sure if this is the right space for it, but there is a plant that's trying to come into Taunton called Aries, and they snuck in just before we passed the environmental justice law. But they had to put the project back out to bid because they did it wrong. Would they be subject to the environmental justice laws?
Yeah, thank you. So I think we'll take all questions first, and then we can answer the ones that we can. Just for project specific questions, we probably have to go back and see what we're able to update, if there are any updates for any project specific questions. But I think we'll go through the questions first and the comments from the public, and then the ones that we can answer right now we will. Otherwise, I'll make sure that we follow up with everyone.
All right, thank you, Sabrina. From the Q&A box, our next question is from David Dow, and they say, how does the EJC plan to address the rights of nature approach for tribes to protect environmental resources essential to their lifestyles?
Thank you for the question.
All right, I see we have Mary Ann Babinski has raised her hand online. Mary Ann, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good evening. My question has to do with designation of EJ populations in the community. I know it's based on the census, and in our community, and I'm sure it happens in others too. So I just need clarification on this. We had a population that was EJ for a long time, and of course, COVID stopped everything for a while and reporting and correcting the maps. And when they came out just recently, again, one of our areas was no longer designated as EJ, and they should have been. They've been for quite a while. And so I was told that there is an opt-in possibility that people in a population, it took 10 people to sign and request that they be restored or with that designation, or even if they didn't have it before, if they think they deserve to be, I don't know what the process is. I guess it wasn't finalized as yet, so I'd like to know what that is. So that's one question. And another question related around that is, who's paying attention to who is a population and looks at when they get dropped out, and who's responsible for saying what happened here? Is there a mistake or whatever? Who contacts the community or the population, the group of people, or the local town or city officials and say, there seems to be a problem here. We don't know how that happened, and here's what you can do to correct the situation. So I don't know what order of responsibility is here at the, whether it's a state level or at the local level here. So there's a whole bunch of other questions tied around that, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And do you turn me off?
Yes, I can unmute you or mute you.
Thank
There
you.
you go. Yeah. Oh, we have another question that came in through the Q&A box. I apologize. That was my timer for the 2 minutes. Peter Delano says, I'm very concerned about hashtag environmental justice related to the Four River Basin, which is Quincy, Weymouth, Braintree. Given you are now 10 meetings into this council, what actions/decisions/policies have been implemented as a result of the recommendations of this council?
Thank you. Kessel, is there anyone else that that is either raised hand or in the chat?
No one else has raised their hands or, oh wait, another question just came in. This is from Frank O'Brien. Comment/question. One significant unresolved issue remains significance thresholds for triggering MEPA or MEPA review, as individual projects in EEJ communities may fall below existing MEPA thresholds, thus not requiring enhanced review. While the existing cumulative baseline of adverse impacts is significant, and the proposed individual project adds to the historical cumulative impacts. When will EEA and the Council and Governor Healy address this issue?
Thank you.
All right, there are no more open questions in the Q&A box, and nobody is raising their hands. So I think.
Thank you, Kessel. So looking at the questions or comments first, I'll open it to the council if anyone has a clarifying question or sort of a comment. Anyone can, this is, I'm chairing the meeting, but we're all sort of council members. And so if anyone wants to make a comment or a clarifying question, please feel free to raise your hand. Marcos.
Yeah, so the question about, I don't have an answer per se, but I know that at a few meetings back, when there was a update to the environmental justice maps in terms of the new census data, that we looked at some maps that identified like what areas had changed, either becoming new environmental justice areas or which had fallen out of that designation. And I thought that was a really useful kind of resource to put out, so I could see that it'd be nice to have that available somewhere whenever that change happens. So at least we have a clear record of what has happened. And it might already exist, but I haven't seen it. But I really like that we did that last time. And I agree with Marianne's question about, some kind of process that people know to look out for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that for the project specific one, I'll look into that, Sabrina, and follow up with you. I don't want to speak on something that is either ongoing or there's a process in place, but I can definitely follow up with you. Melissa.
Yeah, I think I can just speak to, Marcos kind of hit the nail on the head as to where I was going with the previous question. But I think regarding the comment regarding the rights of nature and tribes, I think that's a really important discussion, but it's really not something we've gotten that far yet, right? We've really done a lot of housekeeping with this committee, and we have had some lapse in time, so we do really need to catch up with one another. But I think that is a great question, and it would certainly be something to explore. We have had some discussions, again, as Marcos has mentioned, regarding mapping and layers. And it also sort of applies to the other question, about the communities that may or may not be outlined as EJ communities. For instance, one of our towns may not be, but the tribe may, a tribal indigenous community may exist in that region, even though it's not an EJ community, there is a population that lives there. So really important questions, just like Marcos, I'm not sure we have all the answers yet. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and the EJ definition is definitely a sort of a big part of our mandate, right? It's to review the definition. And so that is in my piece about the working groups, the subgroups that is coming up later in the agenda. So I think the piece around the definition, which I think gets to the question around MIPA and the threshold, can probably be explored and clarified as we dig deep into the working groups and just sort of doing the meat in between the meetings. Sophia.
Thanks, Maria Belén. With respect to the MIPA piece, I'll just say I share concerns around MIPA and the way it impacts environmental justice populations. And I know we're focused on the EJ definition right now, and rightfully so, but I do hope that we are able to talk about some of those big picture issues and ways that MIPA may need to be restructured to address environmental justice issues that have been longstanding for quite a while. Thanks.
Thank you. And it's not in my proposals for a work group, but if you all want to create a work group that's focused on MIPA, I think that's definitely something we can consider. So I'm going to move us along. The next point is around the logistics for future EJ meetings. So I wanted to get feedback from the council members if so this meeting is obviously remote. The meeting before was also remote. The meeting prior to that was hybrid. And so the meeting today, we were hoping to do it hybrid, right? Like in person and then also a virtual option. That fell through, and so we couldn't figure out the logistics at the last minute to find a new place and to find new sort of technical support. So the first question I guess I want to pose to the group is, do we want, let's talk about how often first. Do we want to meet once a month or once every 2 months, or what sort of frequency do folks feel like they can commit to? And I'll open it up to the council if folks want to chime in.
This is Jen Salonetti speaking. I guess one of my questions for that would pertain to the working groups. So if we are creating working groups with some regularity, we might want to consider having a working group meeting 1 month and alternate that with an EJ council meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
This is I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go for it, Pat.
This is Pat Spence, and I agree. I think that's a good idea. Kind of every other month for main meetings, but just to make sure we hold ourselves accountable and have those committee meetings in between. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Melissa and then Sophia.
Sophia was first, but I think I was gonna just, piggyback on that as well. I think that might be, if we are gonna do the working groups, it would really make sense to give us that time in between to discuss and plan. And I think that had been an issue, before, trying to coordinate everyone. So we make sure we have a quorum in this really busy time. So sorry, Sophia, go ahead.
That is fine. Thank you. I agree. I think two just process questions. One is just, I know originally in the roadmap law, there were statutory deadlines around the seating of the council. I'm wondering if there are other deadlines that we're staring at in terms of the approval of the EJ population definition. that would change how frequently we would need to meet is one question. And then the second question is just clarification, and that's whether the working groups would also be subject to open meeting or whether those would be closed.
Yeah, so in terms of I might be wrong, but I believe the deadline for the definition has actually passed. And so that's something that we need to get going right away in terms of revising the definition. I might be wrong about that, but I believe that's the case. The second piece is the open meeting. The work groups can meet without can just do the meat of the work without having to go through the logistics of posting the agenda 2 weeks before or 48 hours before. And so as long as we cannot go over quorum, so we can't have quorum in the work group. So just we need to be really careful about that, even if we have, let's say, 5 people are in one work group and then 3 other people show up, or 4 other people show up, we can't have that happen. So just want to make sure that we are being as transparent as we can and abiding by open meeting law, but also allowing the work group time for folks to meet and talk and dig into the work in between meetings. Kalila.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to the discussion about the frequency of the meetings is, if possible, would love for the meetings to be on the same day every month. So if we could find like a regular schedule, yeah, and time, that would be excellent.
Great. So it sounds like folks are okay meeting every 2 months and then doing the work group meeting in between. Yes. Okay. Okay, so sorry, just thinking about the next piece is around the locations. And so I believe you had discussed before I joined the administration a list of cities and towns or locations to go across the state to make sure that we are being accessible to folks all across the Commonwealth, and not just virtual. I really want to make sure that folks have access to the meetings, both in person and virtual, to the best of our ability. And so I have a list of proposed cities and towns and locations. I can I'll copy them on the chat, but I will also read them out loud. And so it is Brockton, Mashpee, Worcester, North Adams, Holyoke or Springfield around there, Roxbury, Lynn or Salem, Stockbridge, Lower or Lawrence, Taunton, Leominster, and Framingham. So I think those are 12. It would take us, 12, 2 years to get all of those. Every 2 months we go there, every 2 months. So at least, we can sort of get started as long as we're doing the meat of the work in between. I think it's really important. Kalila.
So just to clarify, and maybe this is something that we need to discuss, is the idea that, I guess, how are we balancing like virtual meetings versus in-person meetings? Is it, we're trying to make a decision about, do all of our meetings move to try to cover those geographies that you just laid out? Or, yeah, can you just say more about
Sure.
what you're thinking?
Yeah, so I think, my hope is to be hybrid as much as possible, right? And so both in person and virtual, so that we are physically accessible to, and we show up to people's communities, but also allowing people who cannot go to do that virtually. But I really want to make sure that we are doing both in person and virtual. So the hybrid model is sort of my ideal. But with that said, I think you raise a good point, right? If folks sort of every 2 months going in person. I think it depends on what the council members want to do. My preference would be for the council members to always be in person, right? For us to go all across the Commonwealth to different cities and towns, and for us to be there. So if residents show up, then they see us, that we're there and that we are sort of responding to their concerns or their needs or questions. I do understand there are limitations to getting to all these places, so it's with that caveat. Marcos, and I guess let me ask Kalila, is there a follow-up question, or did that answer sort of?
Yeah, it did. I just wanted to clarify like what we're discussing. Yeah.
Okay. Marcos and then Caroline.
So I imagine it would probably happen that not all of the council would be able to make it to all the locations if we went that route. So if we went hybrid and some of the council members show up virtually and some of us show up in person, it still qualifies as quorum, right? If we have enough of us attending.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I had.
Yes. I mean, yes, I believe. I will double check to make sure. But yes, I believe so. Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely supportive of the approach of being hybrid, having each meeting hybrid and being as many people in person as possible. I am though wondering, you know, we did try the hybrid approach in this most recent time, and I'm just wondering, like, do we have the right resources to be able to make sure that we can enable hybrid every time, or will we kind of run into similar issues? Maybe there's certain locations that lend themselves better, or buildings that lend themselves better to hybrid that we may think about as we plan forward?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because for this one in particular, we went back and forth a lot on location and then virtual versus in person. So I think we do have the resources. I think it's more on coordinating to make sure that we know where we're going to be 6 months from now, and we're already thinking ahead. We're booking Leominster, or we're booking Framingham, or we're booking, so that those are sort of, and like, I think maybe it was Kalila or someone else, but the same day of the month, sort of like the first Monday or the second Wednesday, I think that would also help us make sure that we know where we'll be in 4 months, and so that our ERG, who helps us with the logistics, can you know, it would be easier for them to make sure that we have all of those set up. Hopefully, that's the plan. Melissa?
Yeah, I think the hybrid model really works, and I think especially for, you know, many of us, I don't think for myself personally, right, an EJ meeting, especially because we do hold them often in the evening, to drive from Buzzards Bay to Worcester would really be difficult for me. And I'm sure someone who lives in Worcester would be really hard to get all the way to Mashpee for a meeting. So I think the hybrid really makes most sense. Of course, if it was in Mashpee, I would try to attend in person to be there for the community. But I think you did ask, I think, and to Marco's question, I know that we go through this with our town meetings because I'm on the select board here in Bourne. And so long as you do a roll call, they generally allow the hybrid meetings, even with the open meeting law. So I think that would be doable, providing we do roll call on every vote. So yeah, that's, you know, that's my
Thanks.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree about sort of, you know, getting to the different corners of the Commonwealth might be difficult for folks. So maybe to the best of our ability, if we can show up in person to the ones that are near or closer to where we live. And then, you know, totally understand if folks can't join and in person and want to join virtual. Jen.
My question is if it'd be possible to set up a protocol. I know we're talking about planning 6 months to a year out. Could we consider a protocol if we need to switch to virtual within a given time frame, in part because I'm thinking about what you and others on your team had to navigate in order for us to switch this from hybrid to virtual. So if we could set up a protocol where, you know, within a certain time frame where we find out for sure that the resources are there, we might want to consider weather as well during, you know, different times of the year. So that could be a piece of the protocol as well.
Yep, that's a great idea. I think we should definitely do that. And sort of getting these in the calendar will help us figure those things out. Kalila.
Another request.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not sorry, but I think it would be helpful, especially for as we're gonna move to doing these meetings in communities, if part of the agenda included someone talking about the place that we are in, some of the challenges communities are facing, because I think we know our corner of the state, where we live, but not necessarily what's going on in every community. So I think it would be helpful to just devote time to that.
That's a great idea. Great. So all of those are, you know, we will sort of take all of that and send maybe the sort of protocol, right, for how do we move from virtual to, or from hybrid to virtual. I will send these the list of locations that I mentioned over to you all. We will meet every 2 months, right? And I think that and then we can also send a few options for, you know, the first Wednesday of the month or the second Thursday of the month for us to get that. I don't want to do that right now. That may take up too much time, but we can definitely get that figured out. Are there? I did not put the list of locations, but are there other locations that I did not mention that that folks feel like they should be on the list or prioritized? And then I'll take your question, Jen. Okay, great. So I will put the list that I read out loud in the chat if something comes up. Let's see. If something comes up in terms of an idea on the locations, definitely let me know. We're happy to adjust. But I think, you know, with as much time ahead of the meeting to figure out the different locations months ahead. Okay, so and if weather if weather doesn't permit us to meet hybrid, folks are okay just going fully virtual, right? Yes. Okay. Great. So now we will go over the priorities of our EJ office. And so in the past 6 months, we have been, because I'm the newest member of our EJ office, sort of getting to know all of, you know, the agencies and the different buckets of work and the different ways in which we could have impact and really really move the needle on environmental justice. And so, you know, one of them is meaningful engagement. And so how do we improve the way we engage residents? And, you know, the sort of having Q&A at the beginning and at the end of this meeting is one of the ways in which I feel like it's a super baby step. It's an incremental, but it's really just making sure that folks have a chance and, you know, they don't have to wait hours until they can say something. But I think the piece around ensuring that that residents across the Commonwealth have a voice and that it's actually shaping the outcome, it's a really important part of our work. And so that's one of the main priorities, is making sure that the feedback that we get from the public on projects, policies, programs that we have, that those comments or concerns are actually sort of, incorporated into what the outcome will be. And so one of the ways we're doing that right now is through the EJ strategy, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a couple minutes, but sort of, supporting the agencies in doing that, and how we can incorporate the feedback across the board at our executive office, but then also across all agencies under EEA. The second priority is, operationalizing. I know I don't have a strong accent, but English is my second language, so there are some words that still don't roll out. But operationalizing EJ, right? So how do we operationalize environmental justice? And the EJ strategy is going to be a really important document that is going to guide the agencies on how they implement EJ, right, into their programs and into the way they do their work every single day. And so the EJ strategy, finalizing that document, making sort of it public and as a resource to the communities is a real priority for our office, and just getting that out there and public. It's been in draft form for a long time, and so we just want to finalize it, and then it will be updated every few years. And Carlene will share more details on where we are on the EJ strategy. And then the last three, which are sort of the three buckets of how I see how do we operationalize EJ, is really looking at one, quantifying benefits versus burdens, right? Two, looking at community benefit agreements and how do we ensure that communities across the Commonwealth are engaged in a meaningful way when there are projects that will affect their neighborhoods or their lives or their communities. And then the third one is Justice 40. And so how do we make sure that the dollars that are being invested, either state dollars or federal dollars, are being distributed, in alignment with the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative, but also with our own state commitment to environmental justice communities. And so the sort of first two are, community engagement, meaningful engagement, and operationalizing EJ. And then the three sort of how we operationalize EJ are, quantifying sort of benefits versus burdens, the community benefit agreements, and Justice 40. So those are sort of the three buckets under how I see that we can really operationalize EJ at EEA. And with that, I see that, is Jonathan here? No. Has Jonathan joined us?
I think I am, Maria Belén.
Oh, I saw your face, but it says Ari Zorn. So I'm like, yes, I think that's Jonathan. So Jonathan is here from the governor's office, from the Chief Melissa Hoffer climate office, and in the spirit, in the spirit of Justice 40, right, there are several federal grants, and one of those grants is we are in the planning process right now, and it's called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And so as we develop this Justice 40 work group that we're working on, this grant is sort of already, not in the works, but the planning has already started. And so we want to make sure that we're being really intentional about incorporating environmental justice perspectives. And so Jonathan is here to speak a little bit about the grant and where we, as a council, see sort of prioritizing, issues or areas or answering questions, really, in terms of for if you all have questions, for him to really answer questions about the grant and how it will work. And it is a pretty significant amount of dollars. And so we want to make sure that it is being implemented in the most equitable way. So with that said, I'll pass it to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Maria Belen, and thank you everyone for making a little bit of time in your evening. I'm really excited to be here to join you. I've heard about the Environmental Justice Council. It's a wonderful tool. I see a couple of old familiar faces, of recent familiar faces, so thank you. My name is Jonathan Schrag, and I'm the Deputy Climate Officer in the Governor's Office of Climate. I work for Melissa Hoffer, and my particular focus is on federal funding. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law and how much money there is for climate. And my job is to really focus on how we can align those federal dollars with the climate priorities that the Commonwealth set, and make sure that we are taking in as much input as we can from environmental justice populations, from organized labor, from our municipalities, to make sure that these grants are designed from the beginning in a way that actually delivers benefits, and the kinds of benefits in the ways that will actually, that communities actually want. That's the broad mission. I work very closely with Maria Belen and with EEA. One of the exciting things for the Climate Office is that we do work across the entire executive branch. And so our work includes the Department of Transportation, it includes Health and Human Services, Public Safety, and we can really bring together conversations that are intersecretariat, that are intersectional. We know that to be comprehensive in our thinking about a just transition, we need to think in terms of workforce, as well as public safety, as well as climate, and I'm very excited to be able to do that. So the specific grant is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, and it's a complicated animal. The part that we are underway now that I'm excited to talk with you about is the planning portion. That is relatively small amounts of dollars. It's $3 million to the state, and then it's $1 million to each of 3 metropolitan statistical areas, Boston, Worcester, and we're actually, Massachusetts is doing Providence, Rhode Island as well. The regional planning associations, each of those MSAs received $1 million each, and all together, we are doing a series of planning exercises designed to identify what are called priority measures. Those priority measures are things that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and benefit environmental justice populations, and in that order, in a significant way. And based on that menu, we do some analysis on the list of priority measures. And then that menu becomes eligible for the second phase of the grant, the implementation grant, which will be due in April of 2024. And that's a grant of between $200 and $400 million. So it is serious money. And we're excited about the planning for that grant to get ready to compete for that $200 to $400 million. I will say getting ready for it involves planning not just for the competition, but for all of the federal money that is coming through. So if we think about the climate bank, if we think about solar for all, if we think about energy efficiency block grants, we want to make sure through the CPRG planning grant that we are lining all of those grants and applications up with the priorities that we have set in the Commonwealth to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to affect a just transition. So we've defined a number of priority measures. We've got a list of them. We're excited to share those with you. I think we will be following up with some written material to share those with you. We're eager to have your feedback. We're also consulting environmental justice organizations in about as many forums as we can find to solicit their feedback. Let me give you an example. One of the measures might be to reduce emissions from heavy and medium duty vehicles by 30% by 2030. That would be a measure, and we would say that that measure has a higher priority than, for example, reducing emissions from passenger cars, because the heavy duty vehicles have more diesel emissions because they spend more time in environmental justice populations. And a part of our work over the next several months would be to quantify that, to actually measure what those emissions are and how much better it would be. And we might then design an implementation grant to address the quantified need. And we would say, what if we could electrify these kinds of heavy vehicles in these kinds of communities? And we would seek to apply for $200 or $300 million to do that. That's the exercise that we're engaged in right now. We think that we have a decent idea from sort of science and our policy knowledge of what generally is going to move the greenhouse gas emissions needle and what is going to reduce emissions in environmental justice populations. But we desperately need to hear the perspectives of your organizations of what actually matters and how to build partnerships and get that information into our planning process. So the council is very important, and the partnership with Maria Belen is very important. And we will be following up with some written material to solicit your feedback. I think I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. This is really the first step, and I want to just open the door. I've got some colleagues who work with me who are terrific, who are also excited to get to know you. I think some of them couldn't be around this evening. Maria Belen, is there anything more that I should address that I've skipped over?
No, I think that's good. We can open it up for questions or comments from the council members. I see Namrita and then Sophia.
Thanks. Yeah, nice to be in touch again, Jonathan.
Nice to see you, Namrita. Yeah.
Exciting. And one of the things I'm interested in learning a little bit more about vis-a-vis these grants, I work a lot in the sustainable transportation space. And so I'm just wondering how you're thinking about sort of the intersectionality, particularly related to sustainable transportation and the potential for, you know, more transit and trails, bike ped paths, so forth, being part of the process.
Yeah. So look, I think Massachusetts is ahead of many states in that we have the Clean Energy Climate Plan, and that's very exciting. One opportunity that this planning process has created is we can go back to the CECP and begin to ask hard questions of it. So we've done that. And when we think about transportation, you know, we want to decarbonize transportation. We have two strategies: electrify and reduce vehicle miles traveled. So transit falls into the vehicle miles traveled strategy. And so when we think about that, we're thinking about upgrading stations, we're thinking about upgrading service, we're thinking about potential measures that have been adopted in other locations around traffic management flow, whether that's lanes, dedicated high occupancy vehicle lanes, or congestion charging, or tolls, or other things that are in the mix nationwide. Those are all very big dollars. And one of the things that gives us pause is whether the size of this EPA grant, as big as it is big enough given the flow of money for transit. I think we're really open to that conversation, but we want to make sure that the size of the proposal fits a problem that is solvable with that amount of money. Is that helpful, Namrita?
It is, but I am particularly interested in thinking about things like bike and ped paths also. So and arguably, you know, those will have some issues regarding environmental justice communities and transportation access and so forth. So I'm just wondering if there's any more that you can share about where that might fall in the priorities.
Yeah, well, I think it would certainly, it's certainly something we'd want to follow up with you on. It would, and the draft of priorities we have now is not closed. We're open to more. I think we need to quantify all of them. And the ones that are not measured in the next 4 months, EPA is making us go back over the next 18 months and do every measure. So nothing is going to be left behind. Some things may not qualify for this grant. They may qualify for other grants. But let's follow up offline, Namrita. I think I have your contact information. And last mile sustainable transportation that would enable people to have access to mass transit has significant impacts. And we're very happy to talk about that.
Sophia and then Kalila.
Thanks, Maria Belén. My question, well, so I have two. One is in terms of transit, I know you shared the thinking around reducing emissions from medium and heavy duty vehicles, and I'm glad to hear that, as opposed to just thinking about single occupancy vehicles. But I have one, I would love to follow up more about this, but one thing that I am constantly thinking about is, as we are shifting to electrifying everything, which I would hope would include our public transit systems, that's also going to impact our electric grid, the demand on the grid, and then where infrastructure has to be sited. And so even if it doesn't fit within this grant, I guess there are so many processes that are happening right now that are being led by different agencies within EEA and then across DOT as well, in terms of trying to solve all of these issues. And so I would love to know how you are collaborating and coordinating across those processes so that we're not, we don't have to recreate the wheel every time one of these comes up. So that's one thing. And then the other is just, I'm glad to hear that outreach is happening to EJ and community-based organizations. And I am interested in how I would be interested to hear more in how you are thinking about reducing emissions, particularly in the places that are the most overburdened beyond transit. If you're thinking about the siting of other infrastructure or reducing coming up with policies that would help to reduce cumulative burden.
Yeah, so I don't want to get out ahead of Maria Belén on some of those broader environmental justice policies. I think the cumulative burden conversation is underway in the administration. I'll let Maria Belén speak to it. Whether it's a cumulative impact assessment or whatever words you put to it, that conversation is very alive. On collaboration across bodies, yes, both electrifying transportation and electrifying heat are going to cause changes to the electric grid. And as you probably know, the Grid Modernization Advisory Council has been meeting. Those utilities have just filed electric system modernization plans. We are coordinating across government around how to assess those, and where an incremental piece of money could make a big difference. I think what we don't want to do is pour this special federal opportunity into a dry well and have it just kind of get gobbled up, whether it's by the utilities or someone else. We want to make it really transformative and have an impact. And so And so that's where the difficulty comes in this planning process. One approach that was taken was, look, one idea that has come up is take home electrification, solar panels, weatherization, heat pumps, and transportation electrification in particular neighborhoods, transit, and do a sort of neighborhood by neighborhood, focus on, I think the phrase they used was cities of the future. 3 to 5 cities across the Commonwealth, however big, maybe it's only 1,000 households, but what does that city of the future look like? And focus in an area, I think it would most definitely be an environmental justice population area, to see what integrated cross-measure transformation looks like. I think that's a very interesting concept for bringing together these different processes that you've mentioned. Is that all the elements of your question, Sophia, or were there more?
No, I think that's everything. I look forward to hearing more and to engaging further.
Excellent, terrific. And I will follow up in writing with everyone so that people know how to get a hold of me.
Thank you. Kalila.
Yeah, just a couple of clarifying questions. So I guess I'm curious about how, is this additional now that we have received the planning grant and that process has started, is the implementation funds, how likely are we to get them? And given that there's several different municipalities and another state involved in collaborating on this, I'm curious about what entities are actually going to receive funding and how will that happen?
Yeah.
And then if you could also just restate the timeline that you shared for when you're trying to gather input into the planning grant and when things will go in.
Sure. Thank you, Kalila. So it's really confusing and it's really unclear, and EPA is not being as helpful as we would like them to be. We've been working on this since May or so. Just yesterday, the notice of funding opportunity for that implementation grant was made public. So I spent a portion of today reading through it. The state is an eligible applicant for that implementation grant, but municipalities are also. And so there will be lots of different applicants. What US EPA is going to try to do is take applications of different sizes and have them compete against each other. And so if the total pool of money that is available nationally is $4.6 billion. They are going to make awards. The top award is $400 million, and there will likely be only 1 or 2 of those. And they could have a grant an application as small as 10 million. There might be many hundreds of those. I think Massachusetts, we're not a California or a New York or a Texas. I think it's going to be, it might be tough for us to go at the 400, but I think we do see ourselves competing in the next rung down, sort of 250 to 300, 350, something in there. How the 3 RPA plans and the state plan fit together is something that we are still working with EPA to understand. And I'm happy to come back again in a month and give more information. I can also follow up in writing. We are all meeting regularly and coordinating regularly. I think with respect to making sure that the pollution reduction happens in environmental justice populations, that's part of why we want to focus on 2 sectors that are really location-based: transportation and buildings. That's why those 2 popped for us. Our concern about doing something, for example, on transmission, or in the power sector generally, was that the benefits kind of get sent into the electric grid, and they get sent around the whole state or even the whole region, and it's harder to locate them in a particular place versus buses or buildings. But we may be thinking about that wrong, and we're open to your feedback. As far as timeline goes, we met with the environmental justice table and some organizations there the day before yesterday. Maybe it was yesterday.
Yes, it's okay.
Sorry, a lot happened in the last day. And we're excited that this meeting is ongoing. We're excited to be partnering with Maria Belen to establish a Justice 40 group that would potentially meet on an ongoing basis to help provide some input. And we want to be as open to both structural input, but also informal feedback as we can be. So I think between now and the end of the year, there'll be a lot of back and forth. We have to submit to US EPA a what's called the Priority Climate Action Plan by March 1st of 2024. The implementation grant based on that plan is due April 1st. And we will then be continuing to work on a comprehensive plan, not on the priority measures, but all the measures in the state throughout the entirety of 2024. And so I think this collaboration around how we use federal money to meet climate goals is something that can continue, for the next 18 to 24 months.
Thank you, Jonathan. Kalia, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, no, just that is really helpful. And I think it would be good for you all to just consider like how the council should be involved in this, like, is this a topic in our next conversation, or how, just what is like a simple process for us to weigh in as individuals or collectively. I'm not sure around that. And then I guess the other point is this feels like a very exciting opportunity. And, even just as an example, a number of the communities that we listed out that we want to visit over the course of the next 2 years do not fall into those metropolitan statistical areas necessarily. And so just would hope that the state is keeping an eye out for other federal opportunities that cover rural communities, that cover, places that are just missed by the grants that are kind of more focused on urban areas.
Totally. We're thinking hard about that. One thing we're doing is convening a 351 municipality conversation to make sure that municipalities are aware of what applications are due when and what they're eligible for. We're also trying to find more money to send to the regional planning authorities, agencies, for them to be able to support the municipalities. As a part of this process, we are also meeting with not just those 3 RPAs, but all 13. So there is some connectivity with all of the other munis. One thing that I'm like super focused on are these tax credits. The federal money is great, but it's actually, compared to what we need to do, it's not a huge amount. And the tax credits are unlimited. So finding a way to use small amounts of money to help communities fix their schools, their firehouses, and use those tax credits that offer a 30 to 40% discount. And those tax credits escalate. They're bigger if they're located in an environmental justice community. And the federal government doesn't use our definition, which is confusing, but we can make that work. So the outreach and the engagement is something that I think is super important, and we're thinking hard about. In 10 years' time, someone is going to do an analysis of where the federal money went and where the tax credits got consumed. And it's really important to me that it be number one in Massachusetts and number two in the communities that, you know, need it and deserve where the energy transition belongs, where the pollution is. And so I think we're thinking about all those tools.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Kalila, for the questions. I'm going to move us along just because we are running a little bit behind on our agenda, but thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining and for giving us that sort of debrief. And we will definitely follow up and on next steps on the climate pollution reduction grant. And so now the next agenda item is the EJ strategy and discussion. And so I want to invite my colleague Carleen, who will give us a brief update on where we're at with the strategy and next steps.
Sure. Thank you, Maria Bellin. So good evening, members of the council, the public, and all the participants here with us this evening. For the public, my name is Carleen Lemoyne, Deputy Director of Environmental Justice for External Stakeholder Coordination at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. As Under Secretary Power mentioned, I will provide you with a brief update of where we are with finalizing the draft environmental justice strategy. So for those who may not know, the Secretariat Environmental Justice Strategy stems from former Governor Deval Patrick's Executive Order 552, which called for each agency within the Secretariat to develop a strategy that promotes environmental justice in ways that are tailored to their specific authority, mission, and programs. We have been in the process of developing this Secretariat strategy for 2.5 years or so now. Our environmental justice task force members have worked tirelessly and more so recently to robustly improve and, to the extent practicable, incorporate changes reflecting the comments and input they had received from the public listening sessions held over the winter. I will say that a high percentage of the public comments we received were centered on improving public access to governmental decision-making processes, how agencies should better identify and set up specific metrics for measuring progress, and outlining how the concept of environmental justice principles will be embedded in their agency activities in terms of the type of environmental justice analysis they will undertake to foster decisions, actions, and activities that are equitable and just. So you will note that the final strategy, once that's released, it's much more detailed with respect to outreach and engagement recommendations, as well as several others that we have adopted. Also, we are very excited that the governor's budget for fiscal year 24 allocated $2 million for translation services. So what that translates into, no pun intended, is that you will see resources, particularly vital documents, on each agency's EJ webpage, made accessible in multiple languages. So that will be a huge improvement for the agencies. So this is just one example of the many exciting changes that you will see as we continue to work for the betterment of all residents in the Commonwealth. As I stated before, the agencies did a tremendous job incorporating feedback and responding to public comments. The responses to public comments will be available online when that's completed. We are still aiming to release the final strategy by the end of the year. Once the final strategy is released, our EJ office will then oversee the implementation aspect to ensure environmental justice is and remains central in all agency actions and activities. The strategy will be a living document, meaning that it can be periodically updated. However, no less than every 3 years, the Secretariat will go through a formal process where we will seek input from the public, similar to this current process we're going through now. So overall, I really applaud, the task force for their excellent work, and also to all of you, who have participated and provided your support. I know this was kind of very brief. We're almost at the finish line, but if you have any questions regarding, the status of the strategy, I'm happy to answer them. If not, I will turn it back to Maria Bellin.
Thanks, Carlene. Yeah, I'll just open it up for the council members if you have questions on the strategy or comments. And if not, that's okay. Okay. Thank you, Carlene.
Sure.
So the next piece is the working groups, the subgroups that I think will be really important in getting our work done. I'll mention some of the sort of ideas that I have for work groups, and then it will be up to you all to join them or not join them. But then also, if you want to suggest a new one and rearrange sort of the list, I'm happy to do that. So the first one I think needs to be the EJ definition, right? Like who is really digging into the definition, the mapping, the data, the updating. I'm not suggesting that the council is going to update our data, but how are we abiding by the mandate to make recommendations for the EJ definition, but then also just in general, right? Like if there are questions or concerns, how are we addressing those on the EJ definition in Massachusetts? And so that's one. The second one is the piece that why Jonathan Tragg joined our meeting, which is Justice 40. So if folks are interested in ensuring that federal or state funds are being targeted for vulnerable communities in Massachusetts, environmental justice populations, although the federal grants will have to follow the federal definition of low income and disadvantaged communities. So that's sort of the second Justice 40 subgroup or working group that I was thinking. And if folks are interested in supporting the EJ strategy, I think I also want to open that up. If folks want to work on that, we're happy to create a work group for that. And then the other two that I was thinking of is community benefit agreements or community benefit plans, right? How are we providing recommendations for the agencies to implement models for community benefit agreements, so that when there are projects or plans in different communities that there are meaningful community benefit agreements. And the final one is benefit versus burdens. So, DEP has a community cumulative impact analysis going on for some air permits, but really looking at broader benefit versus burden analysis, and how are we, we as an agency, as a secretariat, ensuring that agencies are looking at that benefit versus burdens. So those are some ideas. I guess I'll open it to reactions first, if people have questions or thoughts, or sort of prioritizing which subgroups do you all feel like we should create. And maybe that's too many. Maybe we just want to create 1 or 2 or 3, but wanted to provide sort of a menu of what I think could be some good working groups.
I'll just give one general reaction. I mean, clearly from our mandate, the most important one is the definition one. And so I'm not quite sure it seems a little, I mean, I think it's important to have the working group, and I mean, it's sort of a working group that I feel like we all need to be on. And so I guess I'm sort of wondering how you're thinking about that, considering that is really like our core mandate.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we could dedicate a piece of each meeting to the EJ definition, certainly. I think if folks prefer to do that in this forum once every 2 months, I think that could work. I do think that it might be valuable to do some of the sort of meat of the work in between, and then those folks can come, you know, and sort of update the council. This is what we're doing. This is how we're thinking about it. And then the council can sort of have a more wide, I guess, the discussion on the council, council-wide. That's what I was thinking. On yes, that sounds like a good idea, or no, that, you know, sort of react to that. So that was my thinking in creating the work group on the definition. That feels like every 2 months or even once a month. I don't know. I'm not sure that we would move the needle as much as I hope.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's exactly right. Like for all intents and purposes, we've been like essentially trying to do it as a big group since the beginning, and it clearly hasn't been working. And so I do like the idea of it being a working group. And I dare say, I'll put Marcos on the spot. It seems like he should be sort of the chair of that working group, because basically I've seen him in terms of like knowledge and depth of expertise on this. And yeah, and just want to figure out like how to put some more, I don't know if urgency is the right word, but just like, yeah, you're like, move it along. Like it feels like I personally feel like we're kind of not meeting our core mandate, that it's been taking us so long to sort of take the next step on this definition process.
Yep, I totally agree. Marcos, you've been nominated. I see your hand, Sophia, and then I'll take any other questions or comments.
I agree on the urgency around the EJ definition. I think you know, lots of folks are eager for more clarity there. And so that feels very important. And I do think it is the kind of thing that we should have an agenda item on for every meeting moving forward until this is finalized. Around the other working groups, I guess all of those things feel important. And I'm just thinking about the fact that I think there's 15 of us. That's 5 different groups. If we all were only in one, that would be 3 people, and all of those things are a lot of work for 3 people to take on. So I guess I'm curious I think it would be helpful to hear from other council members and then also from you, Maria Belén, and the rest of the folks at EEA around where you feel the most urgency or the need for the most guidance. And I'll just say from my perspective, I think there are a lot of different ways that a Justice 40 discussion could go. And so I'm curious about making like the scope of that, but very interested in that. And then I think particularly for me, the thinking about the analysis around benefits and burdens feels particularly meaningful, because it could be applied across the board to a variety of different contexts. You know, siting of infrastructure, MIPA, a lot of other things kind of fall within that vein. But yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that makes sense. Definitely the urgency of the EJ definition. If you ask me, I think the Justice 40 seems like a pretty immediate, you know, we are going to keep being asked what we think about these federal grants. and there is a lot of money coming down. And so I do feel like that the sort of detailed scope, I think we could probably talk about it further, either in this with the whole council or in that work group. But I do think that there needs to be a way in which the council feels and is able to provide meaningful feedback into these grants. There's just a lot of grants that are going to keep coming down from the federal government, and there's also just a lot of money also from the state that is being invested in EJ communities, and so just want to make sure that we're doing that in a meaningful way. Marcos.
Yeah, so thinking about all of those topics are all interesting. So I mean, they're all very interesting, but I wonder if urgency is not the only issue to consider here. Maybe and also be our practical impact, like what we could actually have a practical, effect on. So the mandate, clearly that's in our court, so we should be doing that. That's an easy one. But the other ones, I just wonder, like, where would our input go if we took on that time? So like the Justice 40, I think that's an interesting one on all kinds of levels, particularly because it doesn't line up with our own definition for the state of EJ communities. It's interesting question to ask. But, like if we were to come up and put together recommendations about how we should think about that, like I'd like to see what our objective was there and what the process would be. Anyway, so you get my drift on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and it sort of makes me wonder whether the other topics that I raised could be work groups in the future, right? Like we don't have to create all working groups right now. So maybe right now we pick 1 or 2 or 3 and focus on those, and folks can sort of gravitate to what they think they are most excited about, and they could contribute. And then as we move into our work on, community benefit agreements and cumulative impact or cost benefit and burden analysis, then we could sort of create those and dig deeper into those. With that, we are a little bit behind time. So let's see, are folks okay if we move forward with those 2 working groups? Are people gravitating to either one of the others, like community benefit agreements or benefit versus burdens? Although, we don't really have to create a 3rd one. We could create 2, and folks can volunteer to participate in either of those 2. So let's do that just in the interest of time. Let's do those 2 work groups. Unless, do folks have questions or comments?
Can you the 2 work groups would be then the EJ definition work group and the Justice 40?
Yep.
Is that what you're suggesting? Okay.
Yep. And so you can't all go to both, because then that defeats the point of the work group. We might as well all be meeting every week. And so if folks are interested in, I guess, let me get a show of hands. If folks are interested in, I'll start with the EJ definition one. And then we can look at the numbers. If you keep your hands raised, that would be helpful for me to just jot down. Okay. Wait, hold on. Don't take them down. So I think that doesn't put us at quorum. So that is, let's see. Yeah, I think that's good. And so that's the EJ definition. And I can, we will email this out to all of you. I just want to get a sense of who is interested in which. Melissa, do you have a question, or was that a raised hand for? Great. And then the Justice 40, who is interested in joining a Justice 40 subgroup or working group? Great. Perfect. Okay, so I think the next step for the work groups, we will have to I can follow up via email, but who is in which group, and there probably will need to be a designee or a chair, like Namrita nominated Marcos, and so we'll have to think through the logistics of the chairs and then of scheduling those meetings, so you all can meet and in between the council meetings.
Clarifying question, are the working groups allowed to invite people who are not on the council who have expertise in a particular subject that where we need an answer to the working group meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you are thinking here's an expert of an area that would be helpful in our work group, can definitely invite them to help you sort of, to provide their knowledge and their input. Any other clarifying questions or comments about the work groups? So I think I got this right, so correct me if I'm wrong. For the EJ definition, I have Marcos, Melissa, Cheryl, Caroline, Jen, and Sophia. And then for the Justice 40, we have Kalila, Namrita, Pat, and Lydia. Great. Okay. So now we are definitely behind time a little bit, but I definitely want to move to the next agenda item, which is allowing for public comments if there are any remaining folks in the meeting that want to provide a comment or a question. And just a reminder to either raise your hand or if you could write it in the Q&A box.
So there are a couple of comments that have been hanging around in the Q&A box for a while. So I'm going to read them first, and then we have somebody with their hand up.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So David Dow said, the Mashpee Winnipeg tribe is seeking to manage red herring that breed in local rivers within the town boundaries, but outside the reservoir boundaries. And then an anonymous attendee said, when/where/how will answers to Q&A questions that don't get answered during the meeting get to the attendees?
Were those the two that were in the Q&A box?
So those were the two that have been there since almost since the last Q&A session or the public comment session. There are two that are more recent though.
Sure, you can go ahead and read them.
All right. David Queeley said, thanks, Jonathan. I believe this is in response to Jonathan's talking. Given the priorities you mentioned, is there a percentage of the funding that can only be used for priorities like air pollution reduction versus a percentage of the funding that can only be used for the secondary priority like EJ populations? And then the last question in the Q&A box is from David Dow. And they say, benefits versus burdens working group suggestion. Employ scenario analysis to compare different implementation strategies.
Great. Thank you. So is there another one?
Then we have somebody who has raised their hand.
So let me pause so I don't forget to address. I think the question about how, when, and will questions be answered. We're taking notes of everything right now, and so I will follow up with the questions that were asked that we could not answer and get back to folks or reach out to them to have a conversation about them. Unfortunately, just the setup of a public meeting is that it doesn't allow enough time to answer every single question and then also to address our agenda items. But it is definitely a piece that I'm concerned about in terms of making sure that that residents who show up or call in get a response. So I'll make sure to reach back out to folks who had questions that were not answered. And we are over time, which is, sort of a reflection of that, the dynamic of the barrier that we have in not being able to go back and forth. But I will, Kessel, if there are folks with their hands that are raised, I would like to allow them to say something or ask their question.
Yes, we have one person with their hand raised. So Catherine Rodriguez, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you. I just want to say I've been going to these meetings since they started. I'm from Taunton. I live in an environmental justice zone, and I don't know how, but nobody in Taunton seems to know about environmental justice. Nobody in my government. I've engaged with the DEP. I've sent pictures. I just want you to know that there's people that are forgotten here. I live across the street from an elderly disabled housing. And across the street from that, we have a concrete aggregate plant that spews clouds of silica dust all over our neighborhood. We have sidewalks that these handicapped people have to, if you have a wheelchair or a walker, you have to go in the street where there's cement mixes and Mack trucks and 18-wheelers. And we can't get anybody to listen to us. I did call the DEP. And then there's never any follow-up. I just want you to know that people are out here that need help and don't have any access and don't have any government help, and government ignores you. I call my Board of Health about this air quality and they send me a housing inspector. I think I just want somebody to hear us at this point. And like I said, nobody I call has any idea what environmental justice means, but if you live it, it's terrible every day. Your children are on nebulizer machines. These people across the street from me that have breathing machines, and yet you can't open your windows because there's a cloud of dust on your window screens. So any way you can get to engage, I really don't know how, and I think the hybrid meeting idea is great for elderly disabled people. I'm elderly too, and this just makes it, at least we know somebody is out there. But I just wanted you to know that I'm really thankful that you're here, and hopefully things will change, but it's hard to see when you live in this place. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. One of the things that I started doing in my first few months since I joined was listening sessions, and I've done two, one in Springfield, one in Chinatown, and so Taunton can definitely be one of the ones that I visit next if that's of interest, to come and sort of do a listening session, and just make sure that I am sort of hearing and seeing firsthand from the residents and bringing those concerns and lived experiences back to the agencies that I work in and that I work with. And with that, I would like to adjourn since we are over time, and I know our interpreters have either dropped out or are over their time after the hour and a half. So I want to just close with the next steps will be for us to send the information on the working groups and how to start getting those, how to get those started. And then on the logistics of the next meetings of doing the hybrid versions across the Commonwealth and the communities that I mentioned. And so if there are no other questions or comments from the council members, none, going once, going twice. Great, well, thank you all so much, and thank you to the public for tuning in and for listening. And we are adjourned. Thank you.